Come on, why don't you put your hands together and welcome Pastor Shane. Such an honor.
All right. Yeah, I was having dinner with Steve earlier. It's been a year since I've been here. It doesn't feel like that partly because the last 5 months just went away, and you can't. But now here we are, and I didn't know till I was having dinner that this is your first time back. Yeah. So, and I get to be a part of that. Now that's pretty cool. Yeah. I count that an honor and a privilege. And Steve was telling me his daughter's getting married. And see, I've known Steve and Mark Von Blankensee and all these guys so long that their kids are kids, see, to me. And then now they're married. And Mark's son now has a kid, and we're just all sort of. I'm watching all because see, we don't age. Steve and I, we don't age. We're mid-30s in ourself, and I reckon you stay mid-30s till you're 80, but your body just sort of doesn't cooperate. But that's how it is. So it's so good to be here. If you're the type likes following actual Bible, 1 Corinthians 13. So we're going to get to there in a second. As always, we have our table set up. As not like always, it's not taking up half the room. Right? All I did was brought the new stuff that I've done in the last year. I've got 2 brand new ones in the works right now. It's in post-production, but right now we have it back there. So we have our series on Revelation. That's in 2 parts, 6 in one, 6 in the other. I frankly got nauseous from the hermeneutical butchery that I was seeing people do with the book of Revelation. I can't describe the level of embarrassment that I was feeling with Christians and what they were putting on the internet about Revelation. I just thought, frankly, I just thought it sucked. And so I thought, well, I can either judge it, which I didn't want to do. I could criticize it, which I didn't want to do because that just empowers it. Or I could do something really stupid and fight about it on the internet, which I wasn't going to do that. So I thought, well, here's what I'll do. I'll just tackle it. And we'll put a better narrative out there. And as always, the gentle, kind, compassionate voice that is telling the better narrative eventually wins out. So if you're interested in the book of Revelation, there's 12 parts back there. It's me talking through the whole thing. It was so popular in Bundaberg, they sold out. So I've only got 1 left in listening, none left in watching, but I have infinite on instant downloads. And if you really say, I'm not comfortable with a download, I don't know what to do, I'm happy to post a USB to you to Toowoomba tomorrow, right, from Brisbane. So it's no trouble. I just need your details. So I have that, and we also have our series on faith. I wrote a series on faith and uncertainty, which, hand on heart, I wrote in November. It just happened to work out perfect, right? So that's back there as well. So if you're like me, you have less anxiety if you know what's going to happen, right? So here's what's going to happen tonight. I'm going to do a session. As my sermons go, this is a shorter message than normal. And then what we'll do is we'll take a break. At that point, if you would like something from the table, if you would get it then. As always, we give 100% of our profit away from that. I'm happy to report that as of last week, not one of our kids in our orphanages in China got sick. Not one staff person got sick, and they're only 3 hours drive from Wuhan. So nobody got sick, which is really, really, really good. It was a little nerve-wracking because, just to be vulnerable with you, we make our commitment to the orphanage in January for the whole year. So we give on the 1st of every month. And it's based on how much profit was at the table for the year divided by 12. Right? And then we add a bit to believe God for increase in faith, and we want to be people of faith. We don't want to be stupid, but we want to be people of faith. And then COVID happened. I haven't been able to set up the table, so it was a little nerve-wracking when you make a commitment. But I'm happy to report that 100% because of the grace of God, and a lot from people listening to the nudgings of the Holy Spirit, we have not missed one payment to them, which is really, really good. And I'd like to take a second and thank you guys personally, because in June, you guys made our charitable cause your one cause, and I really appreciate it. It helped us keep our commitments to keep things up and running, and so thank you for that. So I want to open tonight with a story. It's a true story about my life, and I'm using this story hoping that you'll connect with this story, right? So I'm hoping that you listen to this story and go, yeah, me too, at least in part. So When I grew up, my mother is an awesome woman who is a professional. And so my grandmother had to keep me when I was a baby, right? And so my grandmother was a great lady, never cut her hair in her life, never wore makeup in her life, never wore jewelry in her life, never wore slacks in her life, got saved 5 times a day. We grew up in an old school Pentecostal holiness system, right? There's no equality to that in Australia. I'll just give you an example. She never cut her hair, never wore makeup, never wore jewelry. You lose your salvation every time you sin, right? So every time you sin, God's really ticked, and so God's coming and going, and so there's a new name written down in pencil. You could get your name gets erased, then you add your name, then your name gets erased, then you add a name. And I remember as a kid, she'd get saved 5 times a day, yet she would pick on Muslims for praying 5 times a day and failed to see the irony in that. But anyway, so I remember as a kid listening to her agonize, over, oh man, have I remembered all my sins? And I remember she'd pray a prayer something like this: Lord Jesus, if I forgot any of my sins, please bring them to my memory so I can tell you about it. Because this fear of going to bed, and if you die and you hadn't said all your sins, God was going to you torture you for 50. So it was like a weird sort of situation. And in that situation, you'd go to hell for drinking wine, but you could hate black people. That was okay. It was just a weird sort of ethos. And I remember being terrified. I mean, my Sunday school teacher, some of these things I wish were intimated. They were actually overtly said. My Sunday school teacher, I'm 6, said, hey, one day you're going to go to heaven, and God's going to put your whole life on a giant screen for the whole of humanity to have a look at, right? And it's like, whoa. And even at 7, I was like, I don't want my basic wickedness put on a screen. That would be, and why would I want to hang out with a God that's going to shame me in front of everybody? This is just a strange situation. I remember my Sunday school teacher saying stuff like this. She'd say, hey, kids, remember to say all your sins at night before you go to bed, because if Jesus comes back and you haven't confessed all your sins, he could come back and take your parents and leave you in the house all alone, And there's a word for that. It's called child abuse. That's what that is, right? And so I'd lay in bed at night, and sometimes I'd fall asleep and I couldn't remember if I'd said all my sins, and I'd wake up at 2 and be scared that my parents were taking. It never occurred to me that they had their own problems, So I'd get up and check on my parents, which, so you get up, and how do you do that? You just walk in their bedroom, make sure they're still in there, which led to a few awkward encounters, where mommy and daddy were just wrestling. It's just a weird sort of traumatic sort of stuff. And then I remember my granny telling me, hey, Shane, hey, careful. Because even if granny can't see you, God sees you. And here's what they told me. That over my head, there was a credit side and a debit side. And God's keeping track of all that. You're going to face him one day. You better well be in credit. But Jesus died for you in the cross work. That make no sense, right? And so this credit side, now, like all lies that get any traction have at least 70% truth to them, right? Because straight lies aren't compelling. Right? But 70% truth has enough traction with the wheels on the road that it can get down the road. So what are the truths in that story? Well, first of all, I hope you could identify with at least part of that story. This idea that God sees everything and he's keeping score, and there's a problem if I don't make sure that I'm right. Now, in all of that, what is the truth in all of that? Well, let's talk about the truths, right? Does God see everything? Yes. Is it important that we keep awareness of that? Yes. Is it important that we stay God aware? Yes. Is it important that we don't divide our spiritual life into natural and spiritual, like God is here but not somewhere else? Is that important? Yes. Because if we ever lose sight of the fact that God is with us everywhere we go, everywhere we go, everything we do, everything we say, God is in the middle of it, we can justify treating people poorly, right? So we would never treat the waitress at the restaurant who's taken too long to take our order a certain way. If Jesus is sitting at the table, we would never treat our husband a certain certain way because he left his under on the floor for the 18,000th time. If Jesus is in the room, you'd never treat your wife a certain way when she disappointed you. If Jesus is there, you would never, ever, ever point your middle finger at the sky and call someone number one when they cut you off in traffic. If like Jesus is in the car, right? Like we can justify treating people terribly if we lose our God awareness. So, is it important that we stay God aware? Yes. Is it important that we don't separate spiritual from natural? Yes. Is it true that God knows everything? Yes. Is it true God sees everything? Sure. Absolutely. But if all we ever heard was that, with absolutely no focus on in God's love and in his consent, he chooses to forget and not hold things against you, then you can end up with some real jacked up view of God. It would be terrible. The metaphors in Scripture are numerous. Like one writer said it this way: think of it as an ocean, and we'll call that ocean forgetfulness. And we'll think of it this way, that God takes your bad and he throws it in there. And can you imagine how hard it would be to search the whole ocean for something? That's how hard it is for God to find the bad things you did. One writer said it this way: think about it as east and west. And as far as the east is from the west, so God throws your iniquities from him. There's one writer named Paul, and he writes a passage in 1 Corinthians 13, and it's a famous passage. If you've ever been to a wedding, you've heard it read. It's read at every wedding ever, right? And Paul gets to a point where he's describing love. If you'll forgive my imagination, I'm not sure if my imagination's right. This is just how I picture it. Paul's writing a letter, and he's trying to describe the nature of love. And in my imagination, no word he chooses is enough for him. So he goes, love is patient. Is that true? Yes. Is it more than that? Yeah. Okay, love is patient. That's not enough. Love is kind. Is that true? Patient, kind? Yeah. Is that enough? No, I'm missing something. Love doesn't envy. It's not jealous. Because nothing's harder to live with than a jealous person. A jealous, possessive, controlling person. That'd be terrible, right? So love is patient, kind, not jealous, not envious. Love does not boast. It's more than that. It's more. Love doesn't demand its own way. Wow. Is that true? Yeah, but it's more than that. Why is Paul struggling so bad to define love? It's because love doesn't have meaning. Love is that which renders all things meaningful. And that's two different things. Like if you have love, even if you have a lot of things, if you have not love, you can't help but experience your world as meaningless. But if you have everything and if you have nothing but you have love, you can't help but experience your world as meaningful. Because love is not that which has one meaning. Love is that which renders all things meaningful. And it's in that I want to focus on one line from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. And that line is this: love keeps no record of wrongdoing. Love keeps no record of wrong. In 1 John chapter 4, it says that God is love. And without love, you cannot know God, for God is love. It is for this reason that God sent his son into the world to show the world how much he loved it. What if Jesus came in the world not to judge the world or condemn it or criticize it? What if Jesus came into the world to show the world what the love of God is? And if God is love and love keeps no record of wrongs, that means God keeps no record of wrongs. See, scorekeeping is built into our psyche, because here's the problem. When we believe that God keeps score, we'll justify keeping score in our lives. Why? Because we become what we worship, as the great G.K. Beale said. That whatever we think God is, it gets stamped into like our highest sort of ideal of what it is. And if God is keeping a record of wrongs, then we'll justify keeping a record of wrongs with other people. And the holy divine privilege of showing the world what loving relationships look like gets dumbed down to a contest. And some people are ahead of the game, and some people are behind the score, and some people are hopelessly behind the score. This is why it is very confronting when somebody does something completely devoid of scorekeeping. When somebody truly does something charitable with no expectation of return, right? There's something that confronts us. Like if you're at dinner with a friend And let's say Steve and I are at dinner, and we're good friends, and let's say that we're at Chonko, and we're having our Thai meal, and we're having a good conversation, and we don't really notice, we don't pay attention to everybody around us. And when it comes time to go pay for the meal, the manager says, "It's okay, somebody took care of your bill," right? What would our first response be? You'd look around, who? Where were they? And I need to know who they are so that I can get them next time, right? When somebody does something like anonymous charity, it is confronting. Why? Because there's no scorekeeping involved. You don't know who you owe. You don't know who's ahead. It's very, very confronting. It's also built into our language. Think about our language and how much scorekeeping is built into it. I'm gonna get you back for that. Scorekeeping. I'm gonna get revenge for that. I'm gonna get one up. Think about that. A great example is marriage, right? How many times have you heard somebody say this? "Oh God, I don't want to do this, but it'll give me points with the wife," right? Points with the wife? Why do you need points? So I can cash it in later for something I want. So your marriage is a point collecting system? That would be horrible. I mean, I guess that's okay if you're ahead of the score. But if you're ahead of the score, that means somebody's behind the score. That means she's only doing that for you because she owes you because of points isn't there a more profound way to live than that? Or, I don't want to do this, but it'll sure give me some points with the husband. Points with the husband? You need points? Why do we need points? Like, we have this holy divine privilege to show the whole world what a loving relationship looks like, and it's been dumbed down to a contest. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Who's hopelessly behind? See, sometimes marriages feel hopeless, and I want to be clear about this. Sometimes you'll do all you can do, and that marriage ain't gonna work. They are gonna leave, or you're gonna leave, and that's all you can do. And there was nothing else that could be done. And there is no shame here with that. There is no shaming. That happens to good people. But sometimes marriages just feel hopeless because if we're honest, it became a contest. And somebody is hopelessly behind the score. What if we remove scorekeeping from our life? What would happen? We would be able to say yes to just the holy divine privilege to do things for others because they're worth it and not because they deserve it, because they have enough points. But scorekeeping's everywhere. Like, next slide. Like, lots of things keep score. Like, fear keeps score. If you're afraid, you keep it score. Maybe in this COVID season, you're the person who every morning and every night you were consumed with social media looking at the graphs. You finally understand what the term R naught means, right? And you're like, we have an R naught of 1.5. We need to get it under 1, right? And so we're keeping score. Fear keeps score. Anxiety, worry, it keeps score. I tell you what else keeps score. Anger keeps score. If you have a running total in our head of who owes me, the problem with that is there's a second running total of who we owe. And our life becomes a whole thing of who we owe, who owes us, and Steve got the last 2 meals, so next time I got to make sure I get him. And then could you imagine relating to somebody like that? Why are you picking up the meal? Well, you got up the last 2. Well, hang on, I don't mind. Actually, I don't mind picking up the meal every time because I'm not doing it I don't mind buying your meal, right? So it's that. What if those things ended? Let me just summarize it one way. Unhappy people keep score. Unhappy people. Not all unhappy people are unhappy because they're scorekeepers, but all scorekeepers eventually are unhappy. Because there's someone that's gonna owe you. There's someone you're gonna owe. There's something. And we're keeping this internal tally, and it starts tainting. It's not something obvious. It's just a little. It just smells different in the atmosphere. It's like something is in the air, and you can't. It's scorekeeping. Let's put some language around this. Next slide. So I have an early morning flight. I got to leave for the airport at 4 a.m. I have 2 kids. I'd have to get up. That would be a pain. Would you mind taking me to the airport? Right? Someone says, sure. I'd hate for you to have to get your kids ready to go to the airport. That would be horrendous. right? So I'll come get you at the airport. Now, if someone does that just because it's the loving thing to do, that's beautiful. But if 2 months later they call you and say, remember when I took you to the airport? Yeah, I need a sofa moved. Well, then there's something about them taking you to the airport now that's tainted. It's not pure. Or if you would pick up your clothes, maybe I would pick up on the things you like around here. Or remember when I did that? Now I need you to do something for me. It's just not the best life. Now, one of the places we go to be inspired by a different kind of life is the scriptures. And I love the Bible. And so when you open the Bible, you want to ask at least two questions. One, what happened? And two, and more importantly, what's happening in me right now because of what happened? So I want to tell you the story of a guy named Joseph, who was by no means perfect, but he's very inspirational in this topic. His story is so long, I'm not going to read the story. I'll read a part of it, but I'll tell the story. I'll tell it well. Let me see if I can set this up. So there's a guy named Abraham who had a son named Isaac, who had a son named Jacob, who had 12 sons. We don't know how many daughters he had, but we know he had 12 sons. And one of his sons was Joseph. We also know that he was a bad dad. He played favorites with his children. This is bad dad 101. And he didn't just sort of, maybe you have a favorite child, but you just sort of keep it to yourself. That's one thing. This guy announced it, right? He bought Joseph a coat and didn't give any of his other children a coat, essentially proclaiming him special. Now, let's just be honest. Joseph doesn't help his cause at all. Joseph has a dream, and in his dream, these haystacks are bowing to him, and he thinks that obviously means God is telling him his brother's going to bow to him. He doesn't consider he might have eaten bad bacon the night before. No, this is obviously God telling me my brother's going to bow to me. And then he does the worst thing possible. He calls a family meeting, right? And he says, hey, guys, I've got a vision from God. And in my vision, I'm standing and you're bowing, right? This goes horrendously. Why? Because no one likes a vision where you're standing and they're bowing. That's terrible. Listen, if you have a dream and haystacks are bowing to you, first, consider the meal you had that night. Second, even if you come to the conclusion that it's God telling you people are going to bow to you, hold that to yourself. That's stuff you want to keep on the down low, because no one's going to like a vision where you're standing and they're bowing until you come up with a different way to say it. So they choose to kill him. The oldest brother, a guy named Reuben, says, let's not kill him. That would be horrible. Let's sell him into Egyptian slavery. That's somehow less offensive. And then fake his death to our dad. Let him live in grief the rest of his life. This is going to be awesome, right? So then they sell him into slavery. Next slide. And he ends up in charge of a guy named Potiphar's house, right? He's Potiphar's head slave. And it's in this moment that he starts to show some of his giftedness. Evidently, he's very gifted with administration and systems and labor force. He's quite good. But then things turn horribly. Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him of sexual assault. Well, this is horrendous. So he ends up in jail, and in jail, he becomes nice to his fellow prisoners, and he says, listen, if you ever get back into Pharaoh's favor, would you remember me? I actually don't belong here. They, of course, say, yes, we'll remember you, Joseph. No trouble. And then, of course, they don't, right? Let's stop for a second. Let's meditate. If Joseph is a scorekeeper, how many people owe him? A lot. I can think of a few off the top of my head. His dad owes him. His brothers owe him. Potiphar owes him. Potiphar's wife definitely owes him. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, whoever was in the prison, they owe him. Lots of people owe Joseph. And then the story turns. And Joseph comforts Pharaoh in a dream. And then Pharaoh rewards him by making him the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. 22 years after the whole thing started. 22 years. It's easy to say, but let that sink in for a second. I'm 44. That's half my life. Now let's stop and ask ourselves, let's tie ourselves to the story. I want everybody in here to, in your imagination, I want you to picture a time someone wronged you, right? This should be easy. Everybody's got a time somebody wronged them, right? If you haven't, I want to know where you live. right? Like we want to move where you are. It's got something, and I'm not talking about something that, there's two sides to every story. No. Like the knife might still be in your back. The betrayal is still there, right? And I want you to go back to that moment, and I want you to feel the feelings of it. I want you to remember how you felt. I want you to remember that first night. And what did you do that first night? Well, if you're normal, you had imaginary conversations, right? You laid in bed and you obsessed about, have you ever had an argument with somebody that 3 seconds after they left, you thought of everything you could have said, right? And what do? You have an imaginary conversation. You love it. Like, we love imaginary conversations. Why? Because we always win. Look, if you're losing imaginary conversations, get your head checked. That's the one place you can win, right? And you're having this imaginary conversation and you're winning. Everybody is bowing to your point of view. You absolutely are dominating the thing. This would be amazing. If they hurt you bad enough, you would start picturing revenge. Have you ever had that moment where that real dark side of you came out in private and you would secretly celebrate if you heard someone was hurt? Yes, yeah, oh yeah. We'll have a confession booth set up later, ma'am. You can, anybody here gifted with deliverance? No. Let's not let her sit on her own. Aren't we all there? Yeah, we've pictured that. We've pictured revenge. We've actually played it out in our head. We felt it, We're like, that would feel good. Revenge always promises something it can't deliver. You're not actually going to feel better, And so, but we've done it. Now, in that scenario, picture suddenly being given infinite power to exercise your plan. What do? What would you have done? See, to me, this is part of what makes Jesus so compelling. Every temptation of Christ on the cross, not in the desert, every temptation of Christ on the cross was keep score. Hey, we all owe you. Hey, how many people owe Jesus just in the last 2 days of his life? Judas, Malchus, Peter, Caiaphas, Pilate, the whipper, the scourger, the spitter, the mocker, the nail hammer guy. How many people owe Jesus in just the last 2 days of his life? Lots. And all the temptations of Jesus on the cross was, use your infinite power to keep score and exact revenge and get even with us. Lose all your moral authority forever. And that's what makes the cross so beautiful, is that the cross shows us how the only way to exercise infinite power is to submit it to a higher moral ethic of love. That's the only way. That liberty is only truly experienced when it's submitted to love, right? Jesus refused to keep score. If somebody said, tell me something that doesn't have to do with the forgiveness of sins that makes the cross beautiful, I would say the cross shows us how it's possible to live beyond scorekeeping. He chose not to take revenge. He chose not to get even though he had infinite power. Joseph, same way. Joseph is now given infinite power. Who's going to pay now? Potiphar? Potiphar's wife? His brothers? The prisoners who forgot him for years? Somebody's going to pay, right? The story gets better. A famine breaks out in the land that his family is living in. And they hear that Egypt has storehouses of grain that could save their life. So they go to Egypt to buy grain. Here's the problem. Who's in charge of the storehouse? The guy they sold. Oh, this gets juicy. Next slide. It gets better. The dad dies, which removes any motivation for Joseph to be nice. And the whole thing culminates at a table. If you'll excuse my imagination, if it's wrong, it's just my imagination. When you read a story, you have a picture in your head. I picture all 11 brothers sitting around a table. And they realize it's Joseph, and the Egyptian military is behind them, and they're waiting one of two signs: kill them or serve the food. And it says that Joseph gets so moved by the weight of the situation that he walks out of the room and wails loudly enough for them to hear. Stop. Imagine being them, and the guy who obviously has the political power to destroy you happens to be the guy you sold 22 years before, and now you can hear him crying. What is the basic feeling in the room? Joseph comes back in, and he says 3 words: serve the food. See, in Hebrew, a table is a shulchan. A meal is a shul. So you eat a shul on a shulchan. But in Hebrew, the word reconcile is also the word shulchan, without one letter difference. There's not one letter. This is why in Hebrew culture, no matter what someone did, if you share a meal with them, it's all good. It's not that what you did wasn't wrong. It's just I'm not going to hold it against you. It wasn't ignoring it. It was actually naming it. What you did was wrong, but we're going to eat this and we're going to put it under the table. It's not that what you did wasn't wrong. You just don't owe me. You don't owe me. Reconciliation is also an accounting term, if I'm not mistaken. You reconcile. What does it mean? Yeah, the debits are there, but in my love and in my consent, you don't owe me. You don't. Watch what Joseph says to them. Next slide. This is Genesis 50. But Joseph said to them, do not fear. What? For am I in the place of God? I'm so inspired by this. I want to be like this guy. Because everything in me would want me to use my power, at least for a moment, to scare them bad, hey? Like, wouldn't you find just a little bit of pleasure, in making them use the toilet in their pants? Just a little bit. Like you'd want to scare them for 10 seconds and then let them off to 20 seconds. No, Joseph, immediately, don't fear. For am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me. So he names it. He doesn't brush it under. He doesn't brush it to the side, ignore it. He said, no, what you did, that's bad. Let's call that what it is. Let's call it, that was bad. But God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are right now. So do not fear. Why? Because perfect love casts out fear. Why? Because love's not keeping a record of wrongs. It's like there's no debit side. I will provide for you. That's amazing. So not only am I going to let you go and live, I'm going to provide for you and your little ones, my nieces and nephews. If you keep reading, he gives them a fertile piece of land. Everything. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Nothing is more confrontational to wrongdoing than kindness, because everybody expects you to get even. When you're kind to someone who did you wrong, it burns more than trying to get revenge. And that's what's happening here. Now, let's put some language around this. Next slide. So Joseph prioritizes love, which allows the brothers to not be afraid. Joseph frames his place in God's. He's like, look, if there's any retribution, that's God's pay grade, not mine. My job is to be kind. That's my job. Joseph chooses a perspective of gratitude. It's not that what didn't happen. It's not that all these people didn't know him, but it is what you look at. And he stepped back, he said, wait a minute, if I take a tally of good and bad and choose to focus on the good, there's some good things happening here. God was at work in the middle of all this somehow. Somehow God was not above it. God was in the middle of it, making a better story. Joseph honors a position of grace. He says, you know what, I'm going to treat you as you're worth, not as you deserve. That's big time. That's what God's like. Jesus says, if you want to know what God's like, look at birds and flowers. They do nothing to deserve it, but God feeds them and clothes them because they're worth it. Love is a function by which you treat someone as they are worth and not as they deserve. And this is what you see in Joseph. Let's put some more language, because if you know me, you know I hate platitudes, right? I hate saying obvious things with no language around how to apply it tomorrow, right? So let's try to do that, right? So Joseph saw the potential for grace in the situation he found himself in. Let's say it this way. Scorekeeping stops when we see the purpose to save, rescue, restore, and reconcile. When we don't see it as being right or dogmatic or correct, but we see the purpose to reconcile, restore, to table. He says, serve the food. See, when we keep score, we take a potential unity and we turn them into, we scapegoat. We resist the opportunity to deal with something deep in ourselves, and we convince ourselves, if they just weren't in my life would be better. Likely not. Likely not. Likely there's something else going on. Next slide. See, scorekeeping cheapens the relationship into a competition. And here's the problem. When we keep score, we start convincing ourselves that God keeps score. And the inverse is true. If we believe God keeps score, then we'll justify scorekeeping in our life. And the holy divine privilege to show the world what love looks like gets washed out and ambiguous and white noised into a score. And some people are ahead of the score, and some people are behind the score. And some people are hopelessly behind the score. And that's a problem. And if you're here tonight, I see a camera if you're watching this. And you're one of these people you've resisted Jesus because you see him in your imagination as a scorekeeper. And you know and I know you're not catching up with that score. And so you've resisted Jesus. I want to say a couple of things to you. One, good for you. I would question your mental health if you wanted to have a relationship with someone you thought was a scorekeeper. That just means you have good personal boundaries, because that version of Jesus should be rejected. That's one. Two, the God revealed perfectly in Christ Jesus is not a scorekeeping God. He's not a God that just lets everything go without discipline. But he's also not a God that keeps a record of wrongs and then makes you owe him in eternity. That the good news is that when you come to Jesus, the score gets reconciled and there's no record of wrong. See, the real danger in keeping score is that it violates the love of God represented by the cross. If anything proves that God doesn't keep score, it's the Passion story. The beater, the mocker, the scourger, the whipper, the nailer, the Malchus, the high priest's servant, Caiaphas, the actual high priest, Pilate, Judas, Peter, all these people owe Jesus. But Jesus, in his love and his consent, he acknowledges the evil. He doesn't just overlook it, but instead he confronts it by forgiveness and choosing to keep no record of wrong. What would our life look like if we could live at that profound of a level? Can you imagine the freedom in our relationships if every good thing we did, we didn't have an inner calculator to know they owe me this, they owe me this, they owe me this. I'm a little bit behind them. I better catch up there. What would that be like? Now, good sermons are not meant to be agreed with, nor disagreed with. They're meant to be wrestled with for application. So what if we know something if we're not going to apply it? So a couple thoughts on that. One, Jesus didn't die simply to fix a problem, but to destroy an entire framework of living by scorekeeping. See, the ancient Jews had mastered the art of scorekeeping. The whole temple system was awesome at it. If you want a scorekeeping system, that's all you did. What did you do? You did what? Oh my goodness. Did you mean to or not mean to? Oh, you didn't mean to. Oh, then you owe a bird. You give a bird, God's good, right? Oh, sir, you meant to do that. You know you meant to do that. That's a goat and a half a hin of wine, and you're good. And who's going to drink that wine? God? No, the priest, right? What did you do? Oh, my Lord, ma'am, seriously. Goat, bird, a quarter hin of wine, half a hin of water, and you're good. See, the temple system had mastered the art of what's called transactional theology. If you do this, God's okay. Jesus didn't die simply to forgive sins, although that's part of the story. It was more profound than that. He destroyed the entire framework of scorekeeping entirely, and that, in the first century, was called good news. That's good. That's good news. So where are we violating that in our marriages? Right now in your marriage, are you ahead of the score or behind the score? Or hopelessly behind? You're hopeless. Or, right. Or, are you going, yeah, there's no score here. We don't operate that way. That'd be better. Or what about in relationships that aren't marriage, like your neighbor? Do you spend 8 hours a day at work calculating how much harder you work than everybody else? And who deserves the promotion? And what would that be like to be free of that? Or are we feeling hopelessly behind the score? Or maybe, let's say it this way, next slide. Where do we need to remember that God keeps no record of wrongs? I think we've heard a lot of God knows everything, he sees everything, he's got everything, he's keeping track, he's making a list, he's checking it twice. That's Santa Claus, never mind. But you would agree with me that we have plenty of that. Is that true? Yeah. Should we remember that? Yeah. But we should also remember that in his love and in his consent, he chooses to forget, not hold it against people, One writer, same guy, Paul, said that he reconciled the whole world to himself by choosing not to count men's sins against them. In other words, I know what you did. You don't owe me, right? Unbelievably confronting. So what I'm going to do to close this session out is I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 13. And instead of love, I'm going to replace the word love with the word God. Because the word God matters less than our picture of how that word functions. Words matter less than the imagination we picture. So if I say God and one person pictures a superhuman with big muscles ready to hurt people, and another person pictures a Jesus on the cross who emptied himself to serve the whole world, we're both saying God, but we have two fundamentally different pictures and one is more healthy. Yeah. And so I wonder if we could change our default imagination of what we mean when we say God. If we just read it this way, and would this God be worth believing in? God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy. God does not boast. God is not proud. God does not dishonor other people. God is not self-seeking. God is not easily angered. Maybe we could deal with that one later. God keeps no record of wrong. God keeps no record of wrong. God does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. God always protects you, always trusts you, always hopes in you, always perseveres. And when Paul runs out of language, he just goes, God never fails. So my brothers and sisters of Belong, may we live on a higher, more profound level than scorekeeping. It's a better way to live. May we live on a level that we resist the urge to keep score and we can show the world what it looks like to live in a loving relationship. Maybe there's someone we need to tell this week, what you did was wrong, but from this day forward, you don't owe me anymore. Maybe you need to go to the cemetery and tell the dad, tell the mom, what you did was wrong, but you don't owe me anymore. Maybe we can confront the wrongdoing by choosing not to hold it against them. There's a lot of confrontation in that. And maybe we could live more profound and show the world that we can live above the game. That we're not going to keep score because God keeps no record of wrong. I bless you to live with an awareness that in his love and in his consent, he's not holding it against you. And may we be so inspired by that we don't hold it against them.